Hi, YouTube. Hello, good morning. Hope everybody's doing well. We got a lot to unpack today, and I'm excited about it because, why not? It's a day ending in Y. Your president is skitzing out all over the place, but we got a lot to get in because, unfortunately, I'm going to have to do a thing that I don't often do, and I was already explaining this to the Urban View audience here at SiriusXM, where Talk Empowers and Becomes Action, channel 126. I have to do a thing today that I don't often do, and that is I have to talk about pop culture. I don't usually talk about pop culture. It's not my lane. I enjoy pop culture. I am a participant and a consumer of pop culture, but unless it's got a political element, I really sort of just stick to the politics. Unfortunately, today, those things have bridged, and I'm going to have to talk about Nicki Minaj today, and not about her music, so I know if you were part of the Barbs, like, shout out to you. This ain't got nothing to do with her music, but she has now thrust herself onto the international stage in ways that, quite frankly, have really bad implications. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that because I think it's important that you know what's happening. And it's important that we know how people from our community are being used to basically excuse a whole lot of things, allow for a lot of things, and quite frankly, set the pathway for whiteness to expand white supremacy in a whole host of ways. I want to also just pause here really quickly and just, I'm going to toot a little bit of a horn, just a little bit, if you don't mind, if y'all just give me a second. I just learned from my producer that we have officially reached the 500,000 download mark for the Lurie Breaks It Down podcast. So yay, shout out to us. Pew, 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 pew. And at the same time, I also find out that thanks to you amazing people in the Urban View audience and the YouTube audience, we now have crossed over 5 million views on YouTube. So pew, 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 pew. Woohoo! I am very, very thankful. And as you can see, I'm wearing my Thankful by Nature t-shirt, yes, because this is part of my Thankful by Nature line, which you all will get a chance to find out a little bit about. Not today. I'm just letting you know how thankful I am because I'm thankful by nature. Shout out to the moment of gratitude. But we got a lot to talk about, and I was going to start first talking about Lindsay Halligan and WEI lawyers, but I'm going to actually start with talking about Nicki Minaj because I think it's important that we have this conversation sort of as a tone-setting discussion. And again, this is not about her music, so I don't expect to see none of y'all who are super fans of hers. I know she has a very assertive and wonderful fan base. If you're going to critique in the comments about what I'm saying, make it about the substantive critique because I'm not talking about her music. This is not about, who did it better, her car. This ain't about any of that stuff. This is about war. This is about people possibly going to war and dying as a result of decisions that people are making. And so we're going to have to talk about it. Now, Nicki Minaj is set to speak at the United Nations today on behalf of the Trump administration. On behalf of the Trump administration, she's going to be using her platform to basically work with Donald Trump's ambassador, UN ambassador Mike Waltz, to talk about the treatment of Christian people in Nigeria. Now, you may have seen Donald Trump talking a lot about how he wants to invade Nigeria. He's talking about it as though Nigeria has a problem with Christians being attacked by non-Christians, specifically by Muslims. That is not the case. In Nigeria, you have a lot of people who have been persecuted, not because of their religion, but because they're not a part of the terrorist group that's doing the terrorizing. You guys may recall when President Barack Obama was in office, the young girls who were taken from the school. That's when a lot of us first learned the name Boko Haram. Boko Haram is a group, it's a fundamentalist group that does engage in violence, but they engage in violence as against the Christians, they engage in violence as against the Muslims, they engage in violence as against the people who are practicing African traditional religions. They engage in violence because their object and their goal is dominance. They want to take over the nation. It's not because you're a Christian or you a Muslim. It's because you standing in their way and you are not doing what they want you to do. They're kind of like very well militarized Proud Boys of Nigeria. I know it's a weird example because the Proud Boys over here haven't really done a whole lot in terms of terrorism and blowing things up. False. They have not done it to the same degree as Boko Haram has done here. But now that the Proud Boys are ICE, I guess you could say they are similar because, yeah, so I guess maybe the analogy works. That just sort of came to me, but I guess the analogy works. But basically, Nicki Minaj, who we don't have a lengthy history of political engagement. There have been a whole host of issues taking place here in these United States where it would have been very helpful to have Nicki Minaj's voice. Not to say that she's never been political. She's certainly had thoughts about vaccines when one of her cousins had a physical situation. You all recall what happened. I don't even remember all the details. I'm not even going to go into it. There have been police killings of black people. There has been the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the dismantling of affirmative action. We have gotten rid of voting rights. We have seen our districts completely eradicated. We have seen the rise in police violence. And typically, Nicki Minaj is not someone who we look to for guidance on any of these issues because Nicki Minaj does not do politics in that way. So it was a shocker to me as a politically minded person to now see that she's going to the UN, not to talk about any of those issues, not to raise to the UN the concerns that black people have, that groups like December 12th have been advocating, and a whole host of other organizations have been advocating since the days that Malcolm X was planning to go to the UN to advocate on behalf of black people who were suffering from white nationalist violence here in these United States. She's going to help pave the way for war, to invade Nigeria. Jesus have mercy. But she's basically, according to the reports, this has been covered by U.S. News and World Reports, CNN, everybody's talking about it. TMZ is where I first heard about it, so Jesus, help me, Lord. Mother, Father, God, just help in this moment. But basically, Nicki Minaj has said that she is going to be speaking at the UN because she looks forward to, I'm sorry, what did she say? Oh, the ambassador said, Ambassador Waltz said, I look forward to standing with her as we discuss the steps the president and his administration are taking to end the persecution of our Christian brothers and sisters. Now, I done told y'all, ain't no persecution of Christian brothers and sisters. There's persecution of people in Nigeria who might be Christian, who might be Muslim, but they are manufacturing a narrative that says in Nigeria, if you are a Christian, you are at some level of elevated risk. That is not the case. That is a whole ass white nationalist lie that now our dear sister is being involved in spreading. Similar to how Colin Powell helped pave the way for a whole ass war that we're still reeling from. But we're going to talk about those connections in a minute. Isn't it? It's weird because they also both have Caribbean heritage, as do I. That's a whole other conversation. Anyway, Nicki Minaj says, Ambassador, I am so grateful to be entrusted with an opportunity of this magnitude. I do not take it for granted. It means more than you know. It might mean more than you know, sis, because you are now helping to pave the way to invade a nation on false pretenses that American soldiers and American military weapons are going to be used to annihilate other people in a sovereign nation, mainly because Donald Trump wants the fucking oil. Can we read multiple sources of data before we decide to lend ourselves to this space? I just think it's important that if you're going to pave the way for war, you should know about these things. And if you already know about these things and you made a decision to do this anyway, then you are an op. And I don't necessarily think you're an op, but the actions that you're operating in are very op-like. So let's unpack this a little bit. According to the reports, after Donald Trump went on Truth Social on November the 1st, this is just 17 days ago. Today's what, the 18th? On November the 1st, 18 days ago. Donald Trump says he has, quote, instructed our Department of War to prepare for possible action against the Nigerian government over the killing of Christians. Now, this is happening at the same time that Donald Trump's Department of War is also blowing up Caribbean people out of the fucking water in the waters off the coast of Venezuela. Donald Trump has killed over 80 people who he claims are narco traffickers. But we know if they were narco traffickers, you would use the narco trafficking protocol, which be to not just see the ship before you blow it to fucking smithereens, but to identify the ship, capture the ship with your expansive, superior military power, and then arrest the people on board, get the evidence that they were actually engaged in narco trafficking, and then prosecute them and jail them. But what you're doing is killing innocent fishermen, and they are innocent until proven guilty. But, oh shit, we can't prove them innocent because you killed them. You killed them. You murdered them in the ocean with no legal justification, in violation of international law, which is why the fucking UK is no longer sharing intelligence because they don't want to be brought up on the same sorts of charges that this country's leadership is going to be brought up on. So there's that. Didn't hear her say anything about those things. Now, at the same time that this is happening, he's planning to also invade Nigeria. In addition to stopping all aid and assistance to Nigeria, Donald Trump's administration has also said that the U.S. military is going to go into the African country with, quote, guns a-blazing, to completely, quote, wipe out the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities. Now, Donald Trump recently adjusted asylum rules, which are rules that people who are facing actual persecution use to come into the country and find freedom from the horrors that they are facing. Nigerian Christians were not included in the group that was allowed to continue to pursue asylum in the United States. You know who was the only group who was allowed to do that? White South Africa colonizers. White South Africa colonizers who, again, did not hear Miss Minaj say anything about. Now, I want to play this video for you. This is Shola Moss. Shola Moss is a sister. She's super, super dope. She's got Nigerian roots. She is extraordinarily intelligent as just a brilliant commentator. She is an author. She has written extensively on a whole host of issues, and she knows what the hell she's talking about when it comes to international affairs. I follow her on pretty much every platform that she's on. I want you to take a listen to this clip. It's about a 3-minute long clip. We probably won't play the full thing, so Amina, just listen out for me. I'm going to tell you when to pull it down. But I want you all to take a listen to this clip where she is basically weeks ago, and we played part of this clip on air weeks ago because when Donald Trump started talking about invading Nigeria, alarm bells were going off like, wait a minute, everywhere you trying to invade is a melanated ass country that got oil and resources that you need. Tell us what's really good, okay? I want you all to take a listen to this clip. YouTube, I'm going to share it with you so that you all can see it. Amina, I want to make sure that the people them hear it, but people listen out because I don't think we're going to have time to play the full thing. And let's let it go. Hold on, I want to make sure the timing is right because you know that my internet be interneted. Okay, let's hear it.
Donald Trump has designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Now, I need you to apply the brain cells God gave you and ask yourself why.
Why?
According to Trump, quote unquote, thousands of Christians are being killed. Radical Islamists are responsible for this mass slaughter. Now, 2 things can be true.
Indeed.
1, Christians are being persecuted and slaughtered. But 2, it isn't just Christians who are being massacred and slaughtered. No. It's Christians and Muslims who are being slaughtered, who are being persecuted, who are being displaced by, yes, militant groups, terrorists like Boko Haram and the Islamic West Africa province. But why is it that Trump is framing this as a religious persecution against Christians alone by Islamists? Now, people, Islamist is a whole new word that these dumbass supremacists, be them Zionists or white supremacists, have come up with. And apparently any Muslim is an Islamist. That's bullshit. Let's just say for now that Islamists are those who weaponize Islam, just like Zionists are those who weaponize Judaism, and white national Christians are those who weaponize Christianity. Can you see? They're all extremists. But I digress. Why are they shaping this as religious war against Christians when Muslims have been attacked at the same rate as Christians and for the same decades as Christians have? The mosques are being attacked, bombed, and burnt. And now Muslims and Christians in Nigeria share the same enemy. Oh, about the suicide bombing that's been happening for years that kills Muslims. They don't tell you that because it doesn't suit their narrative. The narrative of the geopolitics of the West, that Islam is the enemy and Muslims are terrorists. Again, Nigerian Christians and Muslims are being attacked, killed, persecuted. Churches and mosques being blown up and being firebombed by the same enemy. Trump, the United States, United Kingdom, the West do not give a rat's ass about Nigeria or Nigerians. They only care about what they can exploit from Nigeria. And right now, this narrative about a religious war is an opportunity they're going to exploit. Trump called African nations a shithole country, tried to force Nigeria to accept prisoners that he was deporting. And when Nigeria said no, he put a travel ban on Nigeria. I don't know. Aren't you putting a travel ban on the very Christians that you claim you care about? Please. Did Trump say he's going to welcome Nigerian Christians as refugees into America? Nope. Hell no. That's only for white South Africans. They don't care about you. The only thing Trump's designation of Nigeria serves is to shame the Nigerian government. And that I'm in agreement with, because I hold the Nigerian government, past and present, accountable and responsible for the ongoing security crisis. There is no political will to eradicate Boko Haram, ISWAP, and any other militant group from the face of the earth. And this,
just for time's sake, we're going to leave it here. Now, when I do the podcast episode, when the podcast episode is released later today, you'll get to hear the full clip, but you could also see the URL so you can find her page and you should follow her. So I'm going to pause it here just for time's sake. So I need us to be crystal clear. Donald Trump has no intention on doing anything because it's going to benefit the Christians. Because quite frankly, Donald Trump is responsible for putting Christians in this country in a hell of a lot of danger. You know how many Christians was in them food lines while they weren't getting access to their SNAP benefits? White Christians. You know how many Christians are going to lose access to their health care because of the one big bitch-ass bill? That big bitch-ass bill, which the name of which, in light of what we're going to talk about with relation to Bubba and who blew Bubba and did Donald Trump blow anybody, that's a whole other conversation. It's a whole other conversation. My point is this. Donald Trump is not going to Nigeria to do anything on behalf of Christians. Donald Trump is going to Nigeria because Nigeria has oil. Nigeria has resources that Donald Trump wants. Nigeria also told Donald Trump, no, you are not going to be able to send people here to some sort of slave camp-like prison the way you were sending people to other countries, third-party countries that you are not even having, you don't even have the legal capacity to do. So Nigeria has stood up to Donald Trump on a few things, and Donald Trump is now zeroing in on them and enlisting Nicki Minaj, the great paragon or patron of political discourse and engagement, to go to the United freaking Nations to talk about why America should go to war. But Nicki Minaj is not the only Black American of Caribbean heritage to have been used in this particular way. I would point you to someone else who has a lot in common with the path that Nicki Minaj appears to be going down right now, and that is none other than General Colin Powell. May he rest in peace. Colin Powell, as you may recall, went to the United Nations in the lead up to the invasion of Iraq. And he went to the United Nations with fake ass information that he says he didn't know was fake. I mean, I guess we believe it. We don't, he's an ancestor. I don't know. Do with it what you will. But as noted by NPR, one of the most pivotal experiences, one of the most pivotal moments that allowed for an opening, a willingness for this nation to invade Iraq, to invade Afghanistan, to be bombing people to smithereens, to destroy entire infrastructures, to kill countless millions of people, was when Colin Powell, just like Nicki Minaj is about to do, went to the United Nations and basically presented false ass information. This ain't about the beat or the bars or the track or the bass drop. This is about bombing people out of existence. This is about war. You should know things before you do this. And if what you know, maybe you know something the rest of us don't, but if you know what the rest of us know and you made this decision, what the entire Pan-African fuck? You are essentially going to allow yourself to be used to promote white nationalism in this country, to a Black American of Caribbean heritage, allowing and excusing white nationalist militarized operations to have a pathway to invade an African nation that many of our ancestors were enslaved in, and Jiminy Christmas on a cracker. I can't, okay. Let's bring it back. You may recall that on February the 5th of 2003, for those of you who are alive, I was alive. I remember this moment. I remember it distinctly because I was like, ooh, Colin Powell, I don't think this is going to work out for you. In 2003, February the 5th, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell, as according to NPR, sat in front of members of the UN Security Council. He'd been a staunch critic of U.S. intervention against Iraq's authoritarian leader, Saddam Hussein. But with the world watching, Powell made a case for war. The article quotes him as saying, "My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources." Sidebar. They were not backed up by solid sources. They were not at all. Back to the quote. "These are not assertions." Sidebar, they were indeed assertions. Back to the quote. "What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence." They were not, in fact, facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. It was not that at all. It was unsolid. It was as solid as quicksand built on a sandy-ass foundation. Colin Powell, the article says, used information that intelligence officials assured him was credible. It was not, as we later found out. There were reconnaissance photos, elaborate maps and charts, and even taped phone conversations between senior members of Iraq's military. "Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons," Colin Powell said. "Saddam Hussein has used such weapons, and Saddam Hussein has no compunction about using them again against his neighbors, against his own people." The article goes on to say that Powell repeatedly used one phrase during his hour-long speech: weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction, weapons of mass destruction. He said the word 17 times, weapons of mass destruction. And it was the phrase that the Bush administration, the article continues, kept publicly using to help justify invading Iraq. A month and a half after that speech, Bush, the president then, ordered airstrikes over Baghdad. It marked the beginning of a military operation to, quote, disarm Iraq, to free its people, and defend the world from grave danger. America was the grave danger. America was the grave danger, unleashing additional grave dangers all across the planet. And Americans began asking questions, says the article. Alan Hunley, a Tennessee dentist who spoke to NPR in July of 2003 while attending the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, said, "It's kind of embarrassing they haven't found anything. It's almost like they were salesmen and had a thing to sell." And that's exactly what it was. They never found weapons of mass destruction. It was a whole ass lie. Colin Powell, I'm willing to be generous, got snookered. Maybe he got snookered, but at the same time, Colin Powell was high enough up in the military that he should have known good and goddamn well that this was some fugazi ass shit that he was finna do. Now, the speech was criticized roundly, and a number of people thereafter said, now that we know that that's just absolutely not true, they basically completely tarnished his reputation. He was sort of, he'll always have this asterisk after his name as a result of that, because the idea is that they were using him to excuse. They were using his black face to excuse their white nationalist incentives. And Donald Bush, not Donald Bush, that's Donald Trump. George Bush is reported as having said to Colin Powell at the time, maybe they'll believe you, maybe the audience will believe you. Because it was always clear in the Bush administration that Powell was more popular than anybody else. They went with the popular blackface because they knew the popular blackface would be able to be received by the world and would hear the message of white nationalists and empire in a soft, melanated tone. And that's essentially what happened. And so to this day, according to the report, quote, the Iraq war is widely viewed as a foreign policy and humanitarian disaster. Here was the result of him going to the UN and flapping his gums about some shit he ain't know what the fuck he was talking about. The conflict, quote, dragged on for almost 9 years, claims nearly 4,500 American lives. Over 185,000 Iraqi civilians were killed, according to Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs. Some 2 million Iraqis have been displaced from their homes by the time U.S. forces pulled out in 2011. That's before we even get to the Afghanistan war, which was an additional war that we ended up into as a result of the Iraqi war. So all of this damage, all of this horror, essentially as based on the words of a person from our community who went to the UN, kind of like Nicki Minaj is today. Colin Powell later called his UN speech a great intelligence failure and a blot on his record. I'll say, you think? Yes, ancestor. It was not just a blot on your record. People died. Entire nations are continually destabilized as a result of those decisions that were made. And I need, before we have people from our community lending their voices to these sorts of white nationalist efforts, I need us to know history. Because if you watch films like Roots, and you see that the people who were capturing enslaved Africans were other African people, when you read our history and you recognize that there were some enslaved Africans who were required to go out with the master to chase down other enslaved Africans who had run away, when you realize that they had to do things because they were forced to, and you're making a decision to insert yourself into international affairs, an area which we have no credible reason to believe you have any actual expertise in a way that is going to be used to justify invading a sovereign African nation. Oh my God. Oh my God. I just can't. I can't. So this is not about the bars, the barbs, the bass drop, the beat drop. It's not about that. It's about why we seem to have lost the plot with far too many of our entertainers from our community who seem to, for some reason, be willing to be used in this way to support an administration that has destroyed integration, that has destroyed voting rights, that has thrust us into a Project 2025 Jim Crow reality. And I don't see you saying nothing about that. Go with God. Do with it what you will. Let's talk about other failures of excellence. White, entitled, and incompetent is a phrase that I coined. You all know this phrase. I say it repeatedly because I think it's important that we are aware of it. And it is a phrase that I use to describe what happens when white people who are committed to a white nationalist reality decide that it's okay for them to not have qualifications so long as they're white. You don't actually have to know how to do things. You just be white. And as I explained far more extensively in the podcast episode, which I'm just not going to have time to get to right now because we're about to go into a commercial break, Lindsay Halligan, who is a white, entitled, and incompetent attorney who I've described many, many times before. You may recall that Lindsay Halligan's claim to fame was she won a beauty pageant that was a part of the Trump world. She was an insurance lawyer for a couple of years, and then she transitioned into working with the Trump administration, and one of her main jobs was going into museums that focus on Black history and get very upset about the fact that they focus on Black history and then come back and report to Donald Trump about how we should not have museums that focus on Black history. Like, that's what Lindsay Halligan does. Lindsay Halligan has never prosecuted a case a day in her life. Never prosecuted a case a day in her life. And yet, when the actual prosecutors, white prosecutors who knew what they were doing in the Department of Justice, told the Department of Justice officials like Pamela Bondi, like Alina Habba, and the other sorts of whack-ass attorneys who are a part of the Trump administration's Department of Justice who don't know a goddamn thing, when they told them, we can't file charges against James Comey because James Comey ain't commit no crimes. There's nothing here in the evidence. We can't file charges against Letitia James, who is now the Attorney General of the state of New York, because Letitia James ain't do nothing. There's no evidence here. We can't do this. The Pamela Bondi, the head of the Department of Justice, told them basically, you're going to have to do it because Trump wants you to do it, and you're going to have to do it. And so those attorneys did the honorable thing. They quit their jobs. They quit their jobs. But they had to have somebody who was going to be willing to file these charges because Donald Trump wants James Comey and Letitia James and Lisa Cook from the Federal Reserve. He wants all these people prosecuted because he's a tiny, small man with a toad-like member. And quite frankly, he sees this as a sort of an assertion of his ejaculative power. You see what I did there? But if you know, you know. If you missed it, it's fine, whatever. But basically, they put Lindsay Halligan, an attorney who had never tried an actual case, never had gone to court, probably didn't even know where the courtroom was. They put her in charge of these cases where she is now prosecuting the former head of the FBI, James Comey, and the current Attorney General, Letitia James, who is a Howard Law student, Howard Law School graduate who knows what she's doing, who's very, very good at her job. She's very good at her job. And they put this white woman in charge of these cases. And this white woman has basically, because she has no knowledge about how to prosecute a case, completely blown the case. Now, I am not a criminal attorney. The first criminal trial that I ever participated in, I was not the lead attorney on that trial. This is when I had left corporate law. I was now in private practice, and I was second chair of a legal team that was basically defending 4 men who had been beat up in court. And those men had been beat up in court while they were in court to defend their students who had been themselves arrested and wrongfully incarcerated and beat up by police. And these students, they're called the Bushwick 32, lovely group of young people who I'd done a lot of work with in terms of helping them throughout the course of their case. And they had essentially gotten permission from their school. They had gotten signed parents' permission slips to leave school early with some of their educators, with some of their parents, to go attend the funeral of a young brother who had been shot in the community. And as they were making their way to the train station, they were surrounded by the police. They were arrested. They were held for over 36 hours. They were not given any food. These were babies. These were high school students. And essentially, they were called the Bushwick 32. Those students happened to be students who were going to the school that my husband taught at the time, Bushwick Community Outreach. And essentially, my husband was one of the 4 men who got beat up in court, sitting in court to defend his students who had been beat up outside of the courts in the streets. And the trial that I was a part of, I was a second seat to some of the most phenomenal, amazing attorneys you have ever known. Michael Warren, one of the best defense attorneys, was part of Tupac's defense team that got him off. Roger Wareham, who is an internationally renowned attorney who I'm now so privileged to be working with at the Center for Law and Social Justice. These 2 gentlemen led this case. We won every single one. Every single one of them were fully acquitted. And then we were able to turn around and sue the NYPD and the court officers. We won that case. It was amazing. But that experience, as I was watching these genius attorneys who were mentoring me through this case, one of the things I'll never forget Michael Warren saying was that our job when we are defense attorneys is we go into enemy lines, we extract our clients, and we pull them back to freedom. And that was the job. And I learned quickly how much I did not know. I had been a lawyer for a lengthy period of time. I am a very good lawyer. I was a good lawyer at that point, but I also knew I did not know how to navigate that case. And if my husband had depended on me to get him out of jail, I'd be still putting money in his commissary, child, because there was no way I was going to be able to win that case. I know enough to know that I do not know how to do this work. White, entitled, and competent lawyers don't have that sense of self-awareness. Lindsay Halligan is one of these attorneys, and as a result of that, she's completely thrown this entire case. It's looking like James Comey's case is at risk of being tossed. Letitia James' case is at risk of being tossed. So I go into this way more extensively in the podcast episode. I just don't have time to do it today. I do want to, however, let you know that Cashin in the Chips Patel, who is the current head of our FBI, is also in a whole lot of legal trouble because he has got his girlfriend FBI details. So we are basically paying for the FBI to perform private security roles for his little girlfriend. And I think she's like a singer or something. She's like a celebrity herself. I don't know. Maybe she'll be with Miss Minaj at the UN today. I will see. But I do want to also quickly say they are voting on releasing the Epstein files today. And again, I'll get more into this in the podcast episode, which is called Lurie Breaks It Down. You can check it out this afternoon. And they are voting on releasing the remainder of the Epstein files that Congress is holding on to today. And there has been a lot of concern because there in some of the emails that we've already seen, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, is asking about whether or not Vladimir Putin still has the pictures of Donald Trump blowing Bubba. I didn't want to talk about this, but because it's a part of what's happening today, again, I don't know how I end up talking about pop culture types. I guess this isn't pop culture, but basically, Mark Epstein had to clarify that the Bubba in question, because Bubba is a very popular name for Bill Clinton, everybody assumed that this meant that Donald Trump had blown Bill Clinton and that Vladimir Putin still had a picture of it. Well, Mark Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein's brother, put out a clarification because he wanted to confirm that the Bubba in question was not Bill Clinton. And Mark Epstein said the following: recently, emails from 2018 between my brother and me were made public. They were simply part of a humorous private exchange between two brothers and were never meant for public release or to be interpreted as serious remarks. For the avoidance of doubt, the reference to Bubba in this correspondence is not in any way a reference to former President Bill Clinton. Any attempt to conflate the reference with President Clinton or to read sweeping implications into them misrepresents the purpose and the tone of the original correspondence. I want to be absolutely clear on this point so the public record is not distorted and so that speculation does not unfairly implicate people who are not actually being referenced in those communications. So we know that Donald Trump is not pictured in anything that Vladimir Putin would have blowing Bill Clinton. But do you know what Mark Epstein did not say? He did not say that there were no pictures of Donald Trump blowing anybody. He just said the person in the picture they were referencing that Vladimir Putin might have is of Donald Trump blowing another Bubba, not Bill Clinton Bubba. So what's curious about this is that while MAGA has been perfectly willing to excuse Donald Trump's pedophilia and the sexual assaults that he has been credibly accused of, apparently blowing another man, and we're presuming Bubba is a man because apparently that's a bridge too far. The violating of little children, that's not going to do it. Ask Megyn Kelly, because the child isn't really a child when they look like they're not a child. We talked about that yesterday. But blowing another man, I am clutching alabaster pearls. And I just want to conclude by saying I am so thankful by nature that we ain't got to worry about this foolishness on my side in my household. But if you happen to be by the UN today and you happen to see our dear sister Nicki, maybe let her know that perhaps this is not a good look and we should not be allowing ourselves to be used to advance empire, white nationalist empire, particularly when empire wants to invade African sovereign nations. Got to go to commercial break.